My fiancée cheated during our engagement party while I funded our wedding alone, so I cancelled everything and vanished from her life without warning forever. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and when I got engaged, I genuinely believed that providing financially was how you proved love, stability, and commitment. I grew up watching men be praised for what they could offer, not what they felt, so when I put that ring on her finger, something in my brain flipped into provider mode automatically. I told myself this was what real men did when they were serious. My fiancée came from a family that cared deeply about appearances, how things looked from the outside, how events were perceived, how proper everything seemed. Every conversation somehow circled back to standards, expectations, or what people would say if something wasn't done right. I felt that pressure constantly, like I was being silently evaluated. Instead of pushing back, I leaned in harder, because I wanted to prove I belonged in her world. I paid for almost the entire wedding on my own. The venue deposit came out of my savings. Catering went on my credit card. Decor, entertainment, even part of her dress, every expense felt like another brick in the future we were building. I remember signing contracts late at night, exhausted, staring at numbers that scared me, and still telling myself, this is worth it. She praised me constantly. She'd look at me with this soft smile and say, "You're so reliable," or, "You're the only man who's ever truly stepped up for me." Hearing that made my chest feel full, like I'd finally passed some invisible test. Every compliment tied my self-worth tighter to what I was giving. Friends congratulated me. Family told me how lucky she was. At parties, people joked about how I was the backbone of the wedding, and I laughed along, proud instead of alarmed. I wore that role like armor. I trusted her completely. I believed sacrifice was temporary, but loyalty was forever, and that if I just kept giving, I'd finally be loved without question. At least, that's what I told myself back then. Not long after the engagement, small things started to change, and I noticed them even as I pretended not to. She began staying out later than usual, always with a casual explanation ready before I even asked. Work ran late, she'd say, tossing her keys onto the counter, or, we lost track of time, like it was no big deal. I'd nod, even when the tight feeling in my chest didn't go away. Her phone was the first thing that really bothered me. It was suddenly always on silent, always face down, always within arm's reach. If a notification buzzed, she'd flip it over so fast it was almost muscle memory. Once, without looking up, she laughed and said, "Relax, you're not my dad," and I felt stupid for even noticing. I told myself trust meant not keeping score. I was exhausted most days. Between extra shifts and side work to keep up with wedding costs, my body felt permanently heavy, like I was moving through water. When I mentioned being tired, she'd smile and say, "It'll all be worth it once the wedding's done," then change the subject. There was never a question about whether I was okay, just an assumption that I could handle it. Her family didn't help. Little comments slipped out during dinners, things like, "Well, a real wedding takes sacrifice," or, "Not everyone can afford to do it properly." They'd glance at me when they said it, smiling like it was encouragement. I swallowed every word and paid the next invoice. Deep down, something felt off. It wasn't jealousy, it was this quiet, nagging sense that I was working harder to hold us together while she drifted just far enough away to keep me chasing. At night, lying next to her, listening to her scroll on her phone in the dark, I'd stare at the ceiling and argue with myself. "You're overthinking. Don't ruin a good thing. This is what commitment feels like." I kept choosing silence, because I was terrified that asking the wrong question might cost me everything I'd already given. The engagement party was meant to be a victory lap, the night where everything finally felt real. I paid for the venue, the open bar, the DJ, every detail planned down to the color of the lights, because I wanted both our families to see that we were solid. When we walked in together, people clapped, hugged us, raised glasses. Someone slapped my shoulder and said, "You did good, man," and for a moment, I believed it. On the surface, the night looked perfect. Music pulsed through the room, the smell of perfume and alcohol hung in the air, and her parents kept smiling like this was proof they'd chosen well. My fiancée laughed easily, posing for photos, accepting compliments. But every time I looked for her, she wasn't where I expected her to be. She disappeared a lot that night. At first, I told myself she was just overwhelmed, bouncing between friends, needing space. "Bathroom line's crazy," she said once, brushing past me without really needing my eyes. Another time, she leaned close and shouted over the music, "I'll be right back," then vanished for nearly 20 minutes. I stayed by the bar, checking my watch, forcing myself not to read into it. People kept pulling me into conversations. Her aunt thanked me for taking such good care of her. A coworker joked, "Don't mess this up, you're a lucky guy." I smiled until my face hurt, even as a dull anxiety settled in my stomach. Every laugh felt slightly out of sync, like I was watching my own life from half a step behind. When she finally reappeared, her cheeks were flushed, her smile too bright. She kissed me quickly and said, "You okay?" like I was the one acting strange. I nodded, because that's what I always did. I didn't want to cause a scene. Not tonight. As the party wound down and people hugged us goodbye, I stood there holding her hand, listening to everyone talk about our future. I remember thinking how strange it was to feel lonely in a room full of people celebrating you. Driving home later, the silence between us felt heavier than the music ever had. I didn't know it then, but parts of that night were missing, and someone else knew exactly where she'd been. A few days after the engagement party, something small happened that I probably would have ignored before, but this time it stuck. We were sitting with a couple of her friends, half watching TV, when one of them laughed and said, "I still can't believe how wild that party got." Then she glanced at my fiancé and added, "Especially that part when you disappeared." It was said casually, like an inside joke I wasn't part of. My fiancé stiffened for just a second. She laughed too quickly and said, "Oh my God, stop," before changing the subject. No explanation. No glance in my direction. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, sharper this time, like a warning my body had been trying to send for weeks. I didn't say anything then, but my mind wouldn't let it go. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the engagement party in my head. Her disappearing acts. The way she avoided eye contact when she came back. The timing. The comments I brushed off. Every memory felt slightly different now, like I'd adjusted the focus on a photo and finally noticed something in the background. The next day, I asked her gently. I told myself I'd stay calm, non-accusatory, the way a secure partner was supposed to be. "Hey," I said, "what did your friend mean about you disappearing that night?" She didn't look up from her phone. "Nothing," she said flatly. She's dramatic. When I pressed a little, she sighed loudly and said, "Why are you trying to make a problem out of everything?" That sentence landed hard. Suddenly, I was the issue. My curiosity became suspicion. My discomfort became insecurity. I backed off immediately, apologizing for even bringing it up. But the feeling didn't disappear this time. It followed me through my workday, through meetings, through every wedding-related payment notification that popped up on my phone. I felt like I was standing on a crack in the ground, pretending it wasn't widening beneath my feet. That was the moment I realized something important had shifted. I didn't trust my peace anymore, and I didn't trust her answers either. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but for the first time, I started wondering what would happen if I actually looked. I didn't go looking for evidence. That's the part people never believe, but it's the truth. One night, she asked me to grab her tablet from the living room so she could finish some work in bed. It was already unlocked when I picked it up, a messaging app open, mid-conversation, glowing softly in the darkroom. I froze, not because I meant to snoop, but because my name was right there on the screen, followed by a laughing emoji. The messages weren't subtle. They weren't vague. They were explicit in a way that made my stomach drop instantly. Inside jokes about how he didn't notice a thing during the engagement party. A message timestamped at the exact time she disappeared for those long stretches. Another that said, "Worth it for the free wedding, honestly." I felt my hands start shaking so badly I had to sit down. I scrolled, even though every instinct screamed at me to stop. The further back I went, the worse it got. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was ongoing. Planned. Mocked. There were references to bathrooms, to back hallways, to how easy it was to slip away while I was busy playing the perfect fiancé. I tasted bile in the back of my throat and realized I was holding my breath. What hurt most wasn't even the sex, it was the tone. The casual cruelty. The way my effort, my money, my exhaustion were treated like a joke. Like I was a resource, not a person. One message read, "As long as he keeps paying, I can deal with it." I remember whispering, "Oh my God," out loud, like saying it would somehow make it less real. I put the tablet down carefully, like it might explode. My heart was racing, my ears ringing. In the bedroom, she called my name, impatient. "Did you find it?" she asked. I stood there in the dark for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the blank TV screen. The guy looking back at me seemed smaller somehow, like something essential had just been taken from him. That was the moment my future cracked in half. And I hadn't even confronted her yet. I didn't explode the way people imagine. I didn't throw the tablet or start screaming. I waited until the next evening, when the house was quiet and my hands had stopped shaking enough for me to speak without breaking down. I asked her to sit with me, and even then, my voice came out careful, controlled, like I was negotiating something fragile instead of confronting betrayal. I told her I saw the messages. I watched her face closely, expecting shock, guilt, panic, something. Instead, her expression hardened for just a second before she sighed, long and annoyed, like I'd interrupted her day. "You went through my stuff?" she asked, eyes narrowing. That was the first punch. Not denial. Not remorse. Just accusation. I explained I hadn't been snooping, that it was open, that I didn't mean to see it. She cut me off. "That's still a violation," she said sharply. "You don't get to spy on me just because you're insecure." My chest tightened. Somehow, within 30 seconds, the conversation had flipped, and I was on the defensive. When I brought up the engagement party, the timestamps, the things they said about me, she rolled her eyes. "It was a mistake," she said. "It didn't mean anything." Then came the excuses: alcohol, stress, pressure from wedding planning. She told me she felt lonely because I was always working. "You're never around emotionally," she added, like that explained everything. I remember asking, quietly, "So joking about using me for money didn't mean anything either?" She paused, then shrugged. "You're taking it out of context." Her voice was cold now. Controlled. "I can't believe you're blowing this up." By the end of it, I was apologizing for my tone, for making her feel attacked, for not trusting her enough. She let me. She stood there while I unraveled, telling me we could work through this if I stopped being dramatic. Later that night, she fell asleep easily, her back turned to me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow. I realized something terrifying then. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was annoyed that I'd noticed. After that conversation, something inside me shifted, but I didn't pull away right away. I think part of me was still in shock, still clinging to the idea that if I stayed calm and reasonable, this could somehow be fixed. So I kept doing what I'd always done: paying, planning, holding everything together, while quietly watching more closely than I ever had before. That's when I started noticing things I'd missed. Emails from vendors forwarded to her instead of me, even though my card was on every contract. A notification popped up one afternoon confirming an upgraded catering package I didn't remember approving. When I asked her about it, she waved it off. "It's only a little more," she said. "You want it to look cheap?" The word cheap landed like a slap. I logged into our shared wedding folder that night and went through everything. The numbers were worse than I thought. Deposits had been increased. Add-ons approved. Payment deadlines moved up without a single conversation with me. She'd been making decisions assuming my money was automatic, unlimited, unquestioned. I wasn't being consulted, I was being used. What hurt most was realizing she never once asked if I was okay with it. Not after the cheating. Not after the confrontation. Not even after seeing how drained I was. When I brought it up, she sighed and said, "Why are you stressing? You already agreed to pay for the wedding." As if agreeing once meant forever. As if betrayal didn't change the terms. Her family backed her completely. Her mother joked at dinner about how men always panic about money right before the big day.
Her father told me, half smiling, this is what commitment looks like.
I felt my face burn, trapped between anger and shame, nodding like I understood.
Driving home that night, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt.
The truth finally settled in, heavy and undeniable. I wasn't her future husband. I was a resource she'd already spent. And the worst part was realizing how easily they all expected me to keep paying, no matter what it was costing me. That was the lowest point of my life, even though nothing dramatic happened on the surface.
No shouting. No doors slammed.
Just a quiet, crushing realization that I was completely alone in a relationship that was supposed to be a partnership. I remember sitting in my car in the driveway long after getting home, engine off, hands still on the wheel, staring at the dark outline of the house like it belonged to someone else.
Inside, she was fine.
That was the part that hurt the most. She laughed at something on her phone, kicked off her shoes, asked if I'd eaten like everything was normal.
I nodded, even though my stomach felt hollow and tight.
When I went to the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself, dark circles under my eyes, shoulders slumped, jaw clenched like I was holding something back every second.
That night, I finally cracked. Not outwardly, internally.
Lying in bed next to her, listening to her breathe evenly while I stared into the darkness, my mind spiraled. I thought about the money, the disrespect, the cheating, the way everyone seemed so comfortable assuming I'd just endure it.
I wondered when I'd stopped being a person and turned into a role. At around 3 a.m., I picked up my phone and opened my bank app. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it.
The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable.
Years of savings reduced to deposits and promises. Future plans already spent on someone who didn't even like me enough to be honest.
I felt this wave of shame roll over me, heavy, suffocating. Shame for staying. Shame for apologizing when I was the one betrayed.
Shame for believing that being useful was the same as being loved.
My chest tightened, and for the first time, I felt tears spill without trying to stop them.
That was rock bottom. Not anger, clarity.
A quiet, devastating understanding that if I stayed, this would be my life forever. Sometime before dawn, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision I didn't tell anyone about.
I stopped planning the wedding. And I started planning my exit.
Once I made that decision, something strange happened. I went calm. Not peaceful, not healed, just detached. The panic that had lived in my chest for weeks dulled into a steady focus, like my emotions had stepped aside and let logic take the wheel. She noticed the change, but not in the way she should have. "You've been so chill lately," she said one morning, smiling like she'd finally trained me right. I nodded, played along, even laughed when I was supposed to. On the outside, nothing looked different.
On the inside, I was already gone.
I started paying attention to details I'd ignored before: contract clauses, cancellation policies, refund windows. I reread emails from vendors late at night, screen dimmed, heart steady, taking mental notes like I was preparing for an exam.
During the day, I acted normal. I asked how her meetings went.
I agreed when she talked about table settings and seating charts. She mistook my silence for acceptance, my lack of resistance for forgiveness.
Once, she squeezed my hand and said, "See? I knew you'd come around." That sentence almost made me laugh.
Every time she talked about the wedding like it was inevitable, something inside me hardened. She never apologized again.
Never asked how I was feeling. She just moved forward, confident I'd keep absorbing the damage. That confidence was the last thing I needed to see. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't tell my family. I didn't even write anything down.
I just gathered information quietly, like someone planning a controlled demolition. I learned which deposits were refundable, which vendors required written notice,
how long it would take for transactions to reverse. Power, I realized, wasn't loud, it was patient. One evening, she asked if I was okay, really okay, and for a split second, I considered telling her everything. The hurt. The clarity.
The fact that she'd already lost me.
Instead, I smiled and said, "Yeah. I'm good." She relaxed instantly, satisfied. That was the moment I knew she had no idea what was coming. Because while she was planning a wedding she assumed would happen no matter what. I was planning how to disappear without leaving her anything to hold on to. I chose a Tuesday morning to start, nothing special about it except that she'd left early for work, coffee in hand, distracted and confident. The house was quiet in a way it rarely was, like it was holding its breath with me. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the first vendor email. My fingers didn't shake. That surprised me the most. I started with the venue. I reread the contract one last time, then typed the cancellation email slowly, carefully, using the exact language required. When the confirmation came back, cancellation received, refund processing, I felt a strange sense of relief, like removing a weight I'd been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't part of me. One by one, I did the same with catering, decor, entertainment. Each click felt final. Each refund notification felt like air returning to my lungs. By the afternoon, thousands of dollars were already moving back into my account. Money she assumed was gone. Money she'd already mentally spent. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. Focused. Like I was reclaiming pieces of myself she never noticed she was taking. That night, she came home excited, talking about a seating chart issue with her cousin. I listened. I nodded. I even asked a question, just to keep things normal. She talked and talked, completely unaware that the wedding she was planning no longer existed. Sitting across from her, I realized how little she actually saw me. Later, after she fell asleep, I packed quietly. Clothes first. Important documents. My laptop. I moved slowly, deliberately, making sure nothing clattered or drew attention. Every drawer I closed felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for years. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at her one last time. She was asleep on her side, peaceful, secure in the assumption that I would always be there to catch her. I didn't wake her. I turned off my phone, locked the door behind me, and walked out into the night. She wouldn't realize what I'd done until it was far too late. I didn't disappear dramatically. I didn't leave a note or block everyone immediately. I just went quiet. I stayed with a friend at first, then a short-term rental, keeping my phone off for most of the day. When I finally turned it back on, the screen exploded, missed calls, texts stacked on texts, voicemails I didn't listen to yet. Her name filled the notifications like static. At first, her messages were confused. Where are you? Did something happen? Then they shifted to irritated. This isn't funny. You can't just leave. By the second day, panic crept in. I could hear it even through text. She started asking about vendors. About emails she couldn't access. About why people weren't responding to her calls. One message read, "Why is the venue saying the date isn't ours anymore?" I stared at that line for a long time, my chest tight, my hands steady. Her family joined in soon after. Her mother left a voicemail accusing me of being immature. Her father texted, "We need to talk like adults." Friends reached out, confused, asking what was going on, telling me she was devastated. I didn't respond to anyone. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that explaining myself had never protected me before. Through mutual friends, I learned how bad it got. Vendors demanding new payments. Deposits gone. Her family scrambling, blaming me loudly, publicly. She told people I had a breakdown. That I panicked. That I was unstable. Hearing that hurt, but it also confirmed something I already knew. She still couldn't take responsibility, even now. One night, she sent a long message. No anger. No insults. Just desperation. She said she loved me. Said we could fix this. Said she'd never meant to hurt me. I read it twice, feeling that old pull, that instinct to soothe, to rescue. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, I imagined replying. Explaining everything. Giving her closure. Giving them closure. Then I remembered the messages on the tablet. The jokes. The entitlement. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. For the first time since the engagement, I chose myself over being understood. And I still hadn't told her the one thing that would hurt the most, that I wasn't coming back, no matter what she said next. It took weeks for the noise to fade, but when it did, something unexpected replaced it: quiet. Not the empty kind that scares you, but the steady kind that lets you hear yourself think again. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. For the first time in a long time, my thoughts belonged to me. People eventually pieced things together without my help. The story she told didn't quite line up, especially when vendors confirmed cancellations and timelines didn't match her version. A few friends reached out privately to apologize for not seeing it sooner. I thanked them, but I didn't feel the need to explain. Vindication mattered less than I thought it would. Financially, I recovered faster than I expected. Refunds came through. I rebuilt my savings. But the bigger recovery was internal. I started recognizing how often I'd tied my value to what I could give instead of who I was. How easily I'd accepted being praised for endurance instead of being respected. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. One afternoon, months later, I ran into someone who asked casually, "So, what really happened with the wedding?" I paused, then smiled, and said, "It just wasn't right." And that was enough. I didn't owe the world my pain as proof. I never spoke to her again. No final conversation. No dramatic closure. Just distance that grew permanent. Sometimes I wondered if she understood why I left the way I did, but then I realized it didn't matter. Understanding had never been her strength. What mattered was this: I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need her regret to validate my decision. Walking away with my boundaries intact was the win. Choosing silence over self-betrayal was the victory. I thought I lost a fiancé. What I actually lost was the version of myself who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. And I didn't vanish from her life to punish her. I vanished to finally save myself.